When we're studying probability, it's really, really important to get the language right. Now, when you're just talking about whether it's going to rain tomorrow or not, you might talk about the chance of rain. So if we look at the Bureau, they would say the chance of any rain tomorrow is 5%. The chance of any rain on Wednesday is 10%. So when you're talking about the chance, it's okay to use a percentage, but if we're talking about the probability of any rain, we can't use percentages. A probability is always a number or a proportion between 0 and 1. So when I say a proportion, I mean a fraction or a decimal between 0 and 1. So while the chance of rain tomorrow might be 5%, the probability of rain is 0.05 because 5% as a decimal is 0.05. And on Wednesday, the chance of rain is 10%, but the probability of rain is 0.1. So once we've got that out the way, let's look at some of the other words that we need to make sure we understand. And I'll write them down here. We're going to look at the difference between outcomes, events, and sample space. So say I'm going to be rolling a fair die. A fair die means that each of the numbers, it's a 6-sided die, and each of the numbers has an equal chance of coming up. So that means each of them have a 1 in 6 chance of coming up. So when I'm interested in rolling this die, I might be interested in whether or not I'm going to get an odd or an even number. So I'm not looking at all the individual options. I'm just saying, okay, what if I'm interested in the probability of rolling an even number? Right, so my outcomes would be odd or even. So if I'm rolling that die, the two outcomes that I'm interested in are whether it's odd or even. And the particular event I'm interested in is whether it's an even number, the probability of an even number. So the outcomes would be odd and even, and the event would be the one that I'm interested in, which is the probability of rolling an even number. And the sample space would be all the options. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. So I'm just going to write that down so we've got it all straight. So the outcomes, well, there are two outcomes I'm interested in particular, odd or even. The particular event I'm interested in is the probability of an even, so the probability of rolling an even number. And the sample space in this case are all the options on my fair die. Oops, it doesn't have a 0. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And the sample space are all the options, and they're separated by commas, so it's a set. That's why we use the curly brackets. Let's look at an example. So in our first example, we've got cards numbered from 1 to 10, and we're going to choose one at random. So the sample space are all the different options from 1 right through to 10. Make sure that you separate them with commas and use those curly brackets. Now the probability that the selected card is a multiple of 4, well, there are two multiples of 4, 4 and 8, out of 10 numbers. So I'm writing it as a proportion, and remember, fractions must always be simplified. You can't leave an unsimplified fraction. An even number and a multiple of 3, well, the multiples of 3 are 3, 6, and 9, and the only one of those that is even is 6. So that means I have 1 out of 10. The probability of rolling, of selecting an even number, which is also a multiple of 3, is 1 in 10. And an odd number or a multiple of 5. So that means they can be odd or multiples of 5. So the odd numbers are 1, 3, 5, 7, and 9. And the multiples of 5 are 5 and 10. But we don't want to count 5 twice. So that gives us 6 in 10, which simplifies to 3 out of 5. So just make sure that you know the difference in the subtleties of the language here. When it's said an even number and a multiple of 3, it means it has to be both even and a multiple of 3. So there were fewer options there. However, in part 3, it said an odd number or a multiple of 5. So it could be odd or a multiple of 5, which gives us more options. So pay particular attention to the subtleties in the language.